Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I've learned a ton from each of the speakers. I tried to write my talk to be able to integrate from the abstracts some themes that we've been hearing about through today. So the title of my talk is Power to the People. Nature and science benefit when people are truly engaged. And if I had to give you a bumper sticker to summarize my talk, it would be power to the people, by the people, for the people, for a sustainable planet. That's the story. That the people, if they're engaged and empowered to act, will be a way to sustain our ability to live on this planet in the natural world. A recent paper by Mark Chandler of Earthwatch and a team of people did a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies of citizen science. And they basically identified 3 ways to engage people. One is the CBM, community-based management, which I term a local analysis of the problem. These are people that are engaged not only in gathering data as citizens, but they shape the project. And they do so because they have skin in the game. They are locally engaged to want to know something about the world around them, which is a very traditional way in historical time, the way citizen science worked. I go back to Gilbert White's Natural History of Selborne. He wanted to know what was going on with the birds in his environment. Were they stable? Were the number of owls? Were the number of hawks changing over time? He wanted to monitor the situation, and most community-based management is a type of citizen science that looks over time for changes, because that world that you're tied to as an agriculturalist is the world that sustains you. You need to know those dynamics, and you can do it by observation and by comparison across time. The second is citizen science they call non-portals, which is field work. Take people out into the field. No child left behind. No child left in the woods. How do we get children back into the real world? How do we get adults in the real world to really look at the world, experience it, and see it through their own eyes in new ways? And lastly are the citizen science projects like we heard about with Zooniverse that are web-based, getting people involved in all sorts of ways so they can add to the databases that we use as scientists to be able to understand the dynamics of the world. If you look at this graph here, I broke it down into the behavioral and organismal side of problems that are species specific, basic ecological problems about species interactions and change over time, and ecosystems, the things that get monitored. And you can see the gray, the dark gray, and the black show that different degrees of these 3 methods are used for these different types of investigations. So it's a not one-size-fits-all world. The tools of citizen science are varied, and they become very powerful when targeted in the right way to answer specific type of problems. Portal versus non-portal, I define as virtual versus field. And as we've seen with Zooniverse or iNaturalist, I've taken this from their website, that you record your observations with a smartphone, you send it to someone, you discuss it with others that are doing the same thing, and then you can discuss your findings with an expert and learn in a back and forth process. It's an armchair sort of biologist. You go out, you gather some data, you send it in, and you are participating in the discussion. Another is to get involved in a project, an expedition, that's led by someone who's an expert, a professional, and you learn by doing with constant feedback, day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour, as you get dirty, get mud under your fingernails, and start to really examine the world around you. And Earthwatch does this, and we saw some nice projects about Coast Watch and about river quality, and going forward. You engage people so they really see the world, and they'll see it differently. I found it interesting, though, that they would bias their data and go to tide pools because they expect to see things there, but not the cobblestones of East Anglian beaches. So there are biases that come with all citizen science data. We as scientists try to deal with that statistically. We work with people that can help, but nonetheless, the data is going to be very rich, and we can use it. So the challenge to us as scientists is to provide a compelling experience that makes a difference. That's the partnership that we have with the public. And I say there's 3 key issues. Now at this point, as a teacher, I would have all my students with clickers answer some questions for me. So we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Why involve the public? So, how many scientists in this room? Have you used citizen scientists? Okay, so you answer this question. Do you do it for your benefit? Do you do it for the volunteers' benefit? Or do you do it that both benefit? Now really ask yourself, how much investment have you had in these three different roles? So who votes for the scientist benefit? One. Who votes for volunteers' benefit? One. Who votes for both benefit? The majority. Okay, and I'll show you my vote. Okay, there we go. Okay, second issue, where to work? Do you do it in the field? Do you do it virtually via the web? Or do you do both? Again, as scientists. In the field? Very few. Virtually via the web? A few. Or both? Okay, so the majority are trying to integrate. And I think it's one of the challenges for us is to figure out how to do that in a worthwhile way. I'm not sure that most of the talks really demonstrated that integration. They were on one side of the divide or the other. So my vote is to do both, but I'm still really trying to figure out how best to do it as a hybrid. And then how to engage people, as a research assistant or as a partner. Scientist, as an assistant, as a partner. Okay, so most of you try to do it as a true partnership where you will be informing people as they go and you'll be learning by their questions and by their actions. Because as we saw, that naive people seeing the world for the first time often are not jaded and they see things differently from the expert or kids with their parents who have expectations. Those new fresh eyes open new windows on the world. If scientists address these three issues well, then volunteer experiences go beyond outreach and beyond public education. In fact, you create champions, ambassadors, knowledgeable decision makers, and activists who can change the world and make the planet more sustainable. And what I'm going to do now is talk about 3 case studies from my own work, where I involve 3 different publics in citizen science projects. One will be the Grevy Zebra Scout program, which addresses the question, can populations of people, populations of wildlife and livelihoods be enhanced simultaneously? Get to the heart of wildlife-human conflict. People that share a landscape with an endangered species, can they do it in ways that both benefit? Second, I'll look at the Great Grevy's Rally and the Twiga Tally, which are, can a BioBlitz provide information to change environmental practices? Can the knowledge that comes from organizing people's activities really change action and lead to policy changes? And lastly, we'll look at conservation clubs, going into schools. Can experiential learning make better stewards in the next generation? The Kenyan school system is one of rote memory, spit-back learning, something that we have dispensed with ages ago. But can experiential learning penetrate that learning environment? Can kids, by doing, become practitioners and change the behavior of their parents or their own when they become the pastoralist herders when they grow up? So these are 3 examples that I want to talk about. So the first is scouts and human-wildlife conflict. Can the Grevy zebras pay the state? Okay. So the Scout program has a series of critical activities. The first is that men and women go out into the bush and carry out their daily activities. Women collect firewood and water, so they go into the closed habitats, and men are pastoral herders, they go into the open landscape. They gather data based on their sightings. And you can see the man there is holding a data sheet, which has lots of little tick points that he can do. Were they seen near water? Were they in open grassland? Were they in closed bush habitats? Were they near people? Were they near livestock? Were they near other species? What were they doing? Standing, walking, or grazing? And what was their age and sex? And they were given a Garmin GPS, so they gave us the location of all of these sightings. I got all that data, I analyzed all that data, and then we come back to barazas, community gatherings, once a year, and share the results. We always start with one of our scouts, and here's Maria, showing the community her data, and then we talk about the findings. I do the analysis, it's not my data. I couldn't work on this landscape, it's too diffuse, there's no roads. They walk it every day. They know it. They know where the animals are. I provide the tools and a series of questions, and they gather the data. They own that data, so the answers we get they appreciate and understand. And you'll see that understanding leads to changes in behavior that are more rapid than I would have ever expected. They earn income. We pay them $3 a day. The average Kenyan wage is $1 a day. People up in northern Kenya, central Kenya, they make no money. So they're entering the cash economy for the first time. And we'll talk about that. That's been a learning experience for us as well. But they're poised to gain even more because they understand what they're doing to that landscape. And their human footprint was huge before we started. So little cartoons here are demonstrating the distribution of the livestock, the sheep, goats, and cattle, and the Grevy's zebra, the endangered species, on the landscape, both the good grassy areas and the poor grassy areas. And you notice that the good grassy areas have about 30% of the pundakanga, that's Swahili for the Grevy's zebra. And these are the Isio Nadama is the non-lactating females. Okay. They're all on the crummy grass, 70% of them. That's the data. They looked at me and said, oh, that's probably not good. You didn't want us to hear that. And I said, no, that's not really good, but that's the reality of the situation. This is what the data really looked like. We broke it down into territorial males, bachelor males, non-lactating females, and lactating females. And you can see about 30% are on the good grass communities. So I present the work to the community. And I come back the next year and I present it again. And this time I had the Marani, the warriors, sitting there in the audience. They don't have anything else to do. The herds are at home. And so they stood up and they said, Professor, we don't do that anymore. We don't put the dogs, which is what the women do, on the Grevy's, and we don't throw sticks and stones at them. We now share the landscape with them. I said, well, I can test that because of all the GPS data. So there it is. 1 year later, 50% of the sightings now have the Grevy's zebra on the good grasslands. I never would have expected that. The consequence of that has been dramatic. When we started the study in 2004, 9% of the population were recruits. Now, what I call a recruit is an infant or a juvenile that will become a breeder as an adult. If your population has few recruits, your population is going to go extinct because the adults are eventually going to die. But if no one takes their place, your population numbers decline. When I started studying Grevy's zebras in 1980, there were about 15,000 in Kenya. Now, by 2004, there were around 2,000. So the numbers have been dwindling. Notice what's happened since our scout program. Through 3 droughts, 2 severe and 1 minor, the population of recruits is now 21% in these communities where we work. Statistical modeling that I've done and agent-based modeling demonstrate that if the population is approximately 30% recruits, it'll be sustainable and stable. So the population on this landscape is approaching sustainability. And you can see that when you provide knowledge to people and other players during that moderate drought provided food during the drought in areas where we now knew the Grevy's were going, then the population didn't suffer during that drought period. So it's a much healthier picture. But it really is only a beginning because we've been paying these scouts $3 a day for 3 days a week with labor. We have 27 scouts in 9 community conservancies, $3 a week, $3 a day, 3 days a week. That's $36 a month. Now, to you and me, that doesn't seem like a lot of money. And it costs about $15,000 a year for us to keep this project going. And what this means is we have funders. Where are our funders? We have funders from the zoos in the United States. In a way, it's their guilt money because they've got the Grevy's zebras in their collections, and their members want to know what they're doing in the real world to prevent the species from going extinct. And our biggest funders are San Diego and St. Louis Zoo. They have good, large collections. And over 9 years, they've invested $105,000 into these communities. Now, households are in what we call manadas. And so the top picture is a thorn bush scrub, and this is a small manada with just 5 households. That could be 1 man with 4 wives, it could be 2 brothers with a number of wives, and you can see the livestock in the central corral. Boma is a corral. And that's to prevent lions from eating them. So every night the animals come in, and they're protected from lions. So households per manada generally in Samburu are about 13 and a half, and each Each household will have 10 to 15 people, depending on how many children they have. And so the people in a conservancy is about 4,000. So if those $36 only reach out to the household, the money's not going very far, it's less than 1%. But if it reaches out through the entire manada, then we're starting to spread that income across 5% of the population. And we're starting to change the equity and the distribution of inequality due to our Scout program. So here's where the money goes. They buy lots of stuff, okay? So Grevy Zebra Trust GZT is the one that manages the program now. They buy mattresses, mosquito nets, latrines, kitchens, so on and so forth. But what's really interesting, when they buy pangas, they don't just buy one, they buy 3 or 4. Why are they buying 3 or 4? Because they give them to family members. They give them to relatives that they have obligations to. And you can see they also loan money. In the last 30 days, we asked them in questionnaires, well, what do you do with your money? Do you make loans? Now, 5,000 shillings is $50. Okay, just to put it into current U.S. income. Well, to Manada, they do about $50. To their own family, they do about $125. And loans to non-family members is about $30. Now you're doing $36, a month. How are they doing this? Well, they're very entrepreneurial. We also asked them, making loans, have you changed since you started becoming a Scout? And most said they increased their loans and or stayed the same. Very few decreased their loans to these different categories. Well, where'd the money come from? So women are entrepreneurial. So minus 60 means 5 years ago, okay? Because this is in months. So we looked at sugar sales. 5 years ago, no one sold sugar. Now, the women go and buy sugar in bulk and sell it to their neighbors for huge profit. Okay? They're making $250 a month from our $36 a month investment. We use as a control egg sales. They always sell eggs because they have chickens, flat over this time. So it really is a change in behavior. And the consequence of this change in behavior has been staggering. The number of cows on the landscape is going down. Now we figured, well, that could be because they're substituting sheep and goats as more profitable than cows. But look what's going on with sheep and goats. They're going down. Why is that? Because they're too busy making money to herd. And as a consequence, the stocking rate on the landscape is going down. And this gives us optimism that the rangeland is going to start to improve. So livelihoods are increasing, and Grevy zebra numbers are increasing, and the age and the sex ratio are increasing. That's a win-win-win. Second question, the Great Grevy's Rally. How well are Grevy zebras really doing on a 25,000 square kilometer landscape? Because we only work in 9 communities. So we had 350 members of the public, which could be Conservancy members, could be the middle class from Nairobi, Ranger Scouts from conservancies, natural parks and reserves, government officials, the Kenya Wildlife Service, and independent scientists like me. Okay, and here's one of our scouts, a community member, gathering data. It was the first full census of a species using photographs from people. We called it the Great Grevy's Rally, and you can see the demarcated area of 25,000 square kilometers. We use a system of stripe recognition that's now what we call wild book, face books for animals. So we have wild books for zebras, we have wild books for giraffe, and it's not only the image data that we record, but it's the metadata. So we're talking about what Jeff was talking about, all sorts of metadata that's so critical, because what the image can tell us is who it is, where it was found, if we had a GPS camera, when it was found, but then we can record aspects about the location, the ecology, to tune it to a question, the why, that the ecologist is interested in asking. So our citizens took 40,000 photos in 5 counties where the Grevy zebra lived, covered 25,000 square kilometers. It was monumental and historic in scope. Now, why all this public effort? Because the Kenya Wildlife Service contracts every year to fly the landscape, to count grevies from the air. The problem is in the hot part of the day, grevies shade under trees, so they miss most of the animals. And they do a fudge factor. They take the numbers seen from the air and a small ground truth thing get that ratio multiplied for the whole nation's data. Well, this landscape is highly diverse. So the numbers are not particularly believable. But with citizen science, with people driving around randomly, taking thousands of pictures with locations, we can actually get really good estimates of the population sizes, not only nationally, but by county, and we can get estimates of our error, because it's a mark we capture, or we call a site recite, because we don't invade or damage the animal. We use the natural barcode of nature as the way that they are marked to follow their fates. My team consists of a series of computer scientists, vision experts, and database architects. And we call it From Pixels to Science to Conservation. And we use this data to start to identify zebras or any other distinctively marked animal. The first thing is we use the images using neural nets to identify where the blob is and demarcate it with a box. Because the second phase is going to be the individual identification, working on the stripes in the box. And so who is this animal? The algorithms will compare it against thousands of animals in the database, and it will match the particular individual as known or not known. And Hotspot does most of the work. This is the matching from the key points that the algorithms identify. And you can see these animals are matched from pregnancy to non-pregnancy in different years. And so we get a really good, powerful way to examine what's going on. Now, Hotspot did some of the work, but all these partners had to take part, because you had to advertise the rally, you had to recruit volunteers, you had to provide lodging and get discounts, food, safety, and training to make sure no one got hurt. We did damage 3 cars. People broke their axles, but fortunately they didn't come to us asking for rebates. They knew what they were getting into. And you can see that the usual suspects, Princeton, St. Louis Zoo, Grevy Zebra Trust, like Hippo Wildlife Foundation, Marwell Wildlife, another zoo, provide the money. But you'll see buried in there Samburu County and Laikipia County. This is the first time Kenyan government officials are investing in conservation. This is transformative, that they are taking ownership of their behavior on behalf of an endangered species. We have to train the trainers, because we can't do everything. We have to devolve control out. And this is some of the stuff that we were hearing about with Zooniverse. How do you spread out the activity to reach at scale a large number of individuals? Jeff was talking about that in terms of the documents. How do you let others do it? Once you unleash the power of the people, you lose control. But you've got to train people to be the trainers, to teach others how to do it. So we train the trainers, they practice, and you can see the glee on their faces when they master the cameras, get the GPS right, know how to take the picture, because it zooms out to 30 power. Fortunately, it has an image stabilizer so that you don't blur the picture, because we do need a high quality image. We then prepare the kit, and we give everybody their cameras, and then what did we learn? Well, we learned that there are 2,250 zebras, Grevy zebras, plus or minus 93 that were gathered by the images. How many images? Over 15,000 usable images. Annotations of the number of animals in those images, so there's more than one animal in often the pictures. And we uniquely identified and named 1,942, which is staggering if your estimate is 2,250. We just about saw, with our 300 people driving around, every Grevy zebra in all of Kenya. That's why the estimate and the error is so low. And those are the equations we use, standard mark recapture equations. We knew that 100 individuals were missed. They were in populations where we had exact counts and were small, or they were in areas that there was warfare, so we weren't going to let anyone go there. So we knew we missed 100 that we saw from an airplane and from areas. So we estimate that it's 2,350 Grevy zebra in Kenya, which is 95% of the world's population. All from the driving around at people's own expense for fuel to gather these pictures. I provided the cameras. The National Science Foundation gave me a supplement on my grant of $25,000 to buy the cameras. And so the American taxpayer is responsible ultimately for the images. We also learned for the first time the population by county. That's never been done before. And there's major changes in regional sizes and locations. Samburu is the Grevy zebra heartland. That's where it evolved. That's where the numbers were in the 1980s. It was 1977 when the first Grevy zebra went to Laikipia. Now look at how many are in Laikipia.
1,206 compared to 429 in Samburu. Overgrazing in Samburu probably has driven the grevies down. And we'll be able to look at the strike patterns to see if in fact they have moved individuals. But also the wise stewardship and the less grazing intensity of the commercial ranchers and the pastoralists in Laikipia means there's more grass, and then probably that's where the recruits are coming from. Again, we can look at the local population dynamics from the images to see in fact that our hypotheses for why the rebound is occurring is true. Lastly, I aged and sexed all those photographs. Okay, and you can see the bottom there, our system organizes the animals, and I can look at all the issues. I picked the male here so that everybody can sex the animal, and it's also a full adult. Okay, so we can do that. This is where I'm going to create a Zooniverse project, because I'm never looking at these images again. It took months and months and months, and crowdsourcing could probably be done overnight, and you know, and it'll be a much easier way to move forward. It's hard to do. Now the age structures, by my model, says if the recruits are 30%, then in fact it's a stable population. And look at that. 4 of the 5 of the counties are sustainable, and the national population is sustainable. So we have turned the corner on the Grevy's zebra. They are now a stable population in Kenya. So how do people do? Well, here's the sightings per individual, per person. It's bimodal. Look at the GGR, the red. We did a smaller project on the great zebra and giraffe count in Nairobi Park. That's the yellow. But you can see that while most individuals only found 1 sighting of a zebra, a particular zebra, some saw the zebra 15 times. Okay? 300 people saw zebras more than 15 times, the same individual. So bimodal, different effort by different members of the public. Quality of the photos were highly variable. Again, look at the GGR and compare it to the smaller scale, the GZ-GC, and you can see that the correct viewpoint, the right direction, broadside, so the computer could do a really good job, is about 50% of the photos. Okay? And look at the effort. It scales with the magnitude of the problem. If you look at the purple, which are the re-sightings, much more for the Great Grevy's Rally than for the zebra count in Nairobi Park. It's because people really wanted to do this study, and they worked extra hard on the second day, and that's why our error estimate was so low. And what's really powerful is that our computer programs will often identify what we call exemplars, the best pictures. And if there's 2 exemplars to compare against the database, look at the change in the success. Now this is the ranking of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the number of images that come up for a human to double check on. And you really want your picture to be in the 1st or 2nd place, otherwise it's more work for you if you're double checking on some of these images. That's 2 exemplars, 2 pictures per individual, and you will get up to 90% accuracy on the 1st or 2nd match. That was the science by the people. How to use it to make a difference. Well, behind the scenes, we had a safari the day we released the results. We had land managers, elected officials, scientists, NGOs, and members of the Kenya Wildlife Service come for a safari. For many of the elected officials who live in the cities, this is the first time they've ever seen a Grevy zebra. They then had an epiphany, realizing that this iconic species, 95% of the world live in Kenya, distributed in their 5 counties. They then took ownership of this. We had a workshop, and they came up with these 5 actions. Notice number 5, develop local capacity, support citizen science monitoring, and data sharing.
Good evening. The museum will close in 20 minutes. And toilets. To enjoy free entry to our temporary exhibitions and a whole host of other benefits on your next visit, speak to a member of staff about membership. Thank you.
You're welcome. So they drafted a proclamation for their county governors to sign, which is going to invest money, funds, look at number 3, invest funds to change people's behavior. So this was a major change. We had civic engagement that night. We culminated with a celebration of sharing at the Black and White Ball. People got dressed up. I'm wearing a dinner jacket. The ambassador's wearing a dinner jacket. Paula Kahumbu, she's wearing a dress. But notice our scouts are fully in gear. They're looking absolutely wonderful as they participate and told stories about the rally. We then presented the results to the KWS director, Katili Mbathi. There's the report we wrote for him. And it was massively covered by the East African, the Daily Nation, the Star, which are Kenyan papers, CNN, the AP TV, and French TV. So it went worldwide that the Grevy's rally was critically important. We then did the kids' Twiga tally, and something happened here, which we did the same thing with school kids from Nairobi, Tony schools, private schools, and slum schools. We did it from kids from our communities, and we did it from kids from Nanyuki. And we then asked similar questions about giraffes, the location, and we could use the spots on the giraffes just like we can use the stripes on zebras. This was the first time kids touched cameras, the first time many of them ever saw wildlife. They lived only 20 kilometers away. It was powerful, and we actually tested some really interesting hypotheses. So we harnessed kids' power. And so I just want to end by talking about kids, experiential learning. Can it make the next generation wise stewards? So we're moving the education away from rote memorization to hands-on learning, and that's not easy in a system where the teachers are not trained to teach in that style. We brought the communities, the teachers and the parents, to a workshop to figure out what curriculum the people wanted. And we developed the hands-on experience for the people based on what the parents and the educators thought was what the kids needed to know. Not us, them. We learn by doing. Tell me and I will forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I will understand, and step back and I will act. That's our philosophy. We take the kids outside after school, because it's not during the curriculum of school, where they actually get to see pollinators. They actually get to see how plants are structured. They then can take pencils with rubbers or erasers and stick it in and see what pollen is the way a sunbird would. It's the first time these kids have ever seen that. On a typical day, we have a lecture demonstration or read a story about a theme. We play games, they act out from going on game drives. They internalize the behavior and ecology of their environment. We also use indigenous knowledge. The parents and teachers said the kids have no understanding about the way the world was when we grew up. And they're amazed. So we had them take an elder out to the elder's favorite place and describe it. And then they compare it to what it looks like today. And they wrote stories and drew pictures then and now. They captured the two worlds of their parents' generation versus their own generation. And they see the difference. My God, there were rhinos here when you were growing up? The kids couldn't possibly believe that. Okay, so this is really experiential learning in a deep sense. We now use camera traps from eMammal through the Smithsonian, so we're moving into high technology. We also identify that the Grevy zebra is more abundant on the pastoral landscape. Notice I've circled it compared to impala. Our schools on the pastoral landscape actually have more Grevy zebra than impala does for some times of the year. That's a surprise. That's a new scientific result. We now, through an Annenberg grant, have a Hippo Cannon. If you go to impalalive.org, without the I, okay, just impalalive.org, you'll see the hippos playing. But if you notice under classroom, we have lesson plans. And our lesson plans are both in green and blue. The lesson plans in green are the Kenyan curriculum, blue are the American curriculum. We now have in parallel for American schools meeting the next gen standards, exactly the same sorts of exercises that we have in Kenya. We've had over 500,000 hits on this website, which is 300,000 from Kenya. So teachers are using this curriculum generated by us. And this year we're going to have little videos from smartphones to annotate these curriculums. And we'll develop more units. So it's really going wild in the sense of bringing nature to city kids and American kids. And we're eventually setting up this year, if we can get the funding, a virtual classroom so that the kids with their 8-hour difference can talk to each other by sending video pen pals back and forth to compare what's going on with deer versus antelope. So, in conclusion, I argue that a sustainable future requires connections. The first connection is between the sciences and humanities. We've seen that today. It's been absolute delight to see how history, about writings, about images, can provide insights from the 19th century to the 21st century. So that connection must be maintained. We cannot let culture and nature be divided. We have to work hard to connect them. Second, Citizens and scientists have to work together. Without a doubt, we have to make sure that by working together as true partnerships, we can make a better planet. But the devil's in the details. I'd argue that scientists need to mentor. I couldn't think of a better word. Mentorship almost implies a one-way direction. But as a teacher, I know that when I mentor my students on their honors thesis, that it's a two-way street. The students often, because of their new eyes on the problem, ask me questions they don't know the answer to. So it's a partnership or mentor. It's certainly not coaching. But it's a two-way street of interacting, because the public that takes part in these exercises, whether virtual or in the field, they have to own the data, because then they'll accept the conclusions, and with knowledge comes power. Real and virtual experience can be equally valuable. Chris and I have been talking during the break, how do we do this? Because we've seen over and over again, people lose interest. And you email them, and there's a rise, but it decays within a few days. Maybe they need a diversified portfolio, like your stock portfolio. Maybe they need to be buffered against their boredom, so they do some virtual stuff, they do some field stuff. How do we get that conversation going and connect our interest to the two different techniques? And I also believe that the complementarity between the field and the virtual will give people different lenses to look at the same problem. And it will diversify and help keep people engaged. That's a hypothesis to be tested. And lastly, the publics we talk about, as I've indicated in my 3 case studies and most of you demonstrated today, are heterogeneous, and the differences must be catered to. So all in all, power to the people, by the people, for the people, because that's what's going to democratize science. That keeps us all working together for a better planet. Thank you very much.